This is a sermon for the 4th of July weekend, and while the 4th is not on our church festival calendar, it's on most everybody's mind for the weekend. And frankly, there's much in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament, and particularly in this week's Old Testament reading, that seems to address nations as much as individuals. So for this week, the reading that I'm using is the Old Testament lesson from the Old Testament book of the prophet Zechariah. Here's what Zechariah says. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem. Lo, your king comes to you. Triumphant and victorious is he. Humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. He will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem. And the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall command peace to the nations. His dominion shall be from sea to sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth. As for you also, because of the blood of my covenant with you, I will set your prisoners free from the waterless pit. Return to your stronghold, O prisoners of hope. Today I declare that I will restore to you double. The Old Testament reading. Now, you aren't probably able to get all of what's going on as you hear this little snippet. So let me begin by putting this whole thing in context, talking a bit about what was going on at the time. Zechariah is one of the very oldest, very last of the Old Testament books. Pretty much everything that you know about Old Testament stories, from Genesis on through the Judges and the Kings, Moses, the prophets, pretty much all of that has happened already. The northern kingdom of Israel was destroyed in 721 BC, and about 150 years later, in 587 BC, the southern kingdom of Judah was obliterated. So the kingdoms of the Jewish people were wiped out. That's all happened by now. After Babylon conquered the last of the Jewish nation that year, and many of the Jewish leadership were taken off into exile for several decades. And then, thanks to Cyrus of Persia, who conquered Babylon, the Jews were freed to come back, and most of them came wandering back to the Promised Land, yearning for a return to greatness. The Messianic King would come, they believed. These verses say the King will come humble on a donkey. You see the relationship with Jesus arriving Palm Sunday as the hailed Messiah several hundred years later. Anyway, Zechariah says, this king is coming to usher in a time of peace and prosperity. He will put the war horses aside. He will bring peace and prosperity. The prosperity will stretch from sea to sea. All of this because God has established a covenant with these people, this nation. He will return them to a position of strength and dominance. Everything's going to be very good indeed. Trouble is, none of that really happened. The power of Persia as the dominant force in their life continued on for a couple hundred years, and then it was replaced by the Greeks. And then by the time Jesus came, the Romans had been in place and in power for a long time. The promised restoration of Israel to this time of prominence and dominance never happened. They continued to be under foreign domination. That's why this Palm Sunday excitement just overflowed when Jesus came and people were beginning to think, this is the promised Messiah. But as we 2,000 years later learned, the dominance that God promised these people was not the dominance of the kingdom over other kingdoms, but a dominance of the human spirit, a freeing from whatever it was that held people down. It was learning to see that our God, who came to us in Jesus, the promised Messiah, was anointed to usher in another kind of time, triumphant, another life abundant. So fast forward to today, 4th of July weekend, we celebrate our kingdom, sort of, the land that we live in. And I readily join in the celebrations. I might wish for a few less fireworks at night that scare the bejeebies out of my dog. But I think the fireworks are kind of fun. I count myself as a proud American. We hang our flag out every 4th of July. When our kids were little, we took them to 4th of July parties, celebrations, and parades. And we've done the same with our grandchildren as they come. We thank God for being able to live in a land where we are free of want. I am proud of the declaration of the Statue of Liberty that reads, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." I'm proud to claim my country as a place that was founded on those kind of principles, on the promise of liberty and justice for all, as we said when we salute the flag. I can see these stories lived out in my ancestors, the welcoming of the poor, those yearning for freedom and a better life. And I get sorry at the attitude that turns hostile to this flow of immigrants that built the country and is still needed. So I don't believe that pride in this country requires me to turn away from those things that are not as right as they should be in this country. America isn't perfect. No human being is, no human community is perfect. I've often thought I was the luckiest guy in the world to be born to the two parents that I was born to, marvelous people, and they weren't perfect. And then over 50 years ago, I married a marvelous person, the best thing that I've ever done. She isn't perfect, which is probably an okay thing. It makes for a fine marriage because I'm not perfect either. None of us are. I've been privileged to serve over the years congregations and synods full of people, wonderful people whom I've loved. And I've yet to meet anyone, any one of them, as perfect. Nobody is. The Bible is full of admonitions for us to be humble. We have faults, all of us. So we're called to be confessional people, to be open about our faults and not defensive or hide from them. Why should it be any different when it comes to our country? We're in the midst of national turmoil, a time when loud voices are raised protesting that this society, this country, has not lived up to its promises and values. For those of us who have been blessed to live lives, it's tempting to be defensive, but I'd rather say, I think this land is full of promise. Tell me why it doesn't feel that way to you. How have you experienced it? How can we together make it what it has promised to be? And then we begin to move forward toward fulfilling this promise of liberty and justice for all. So back to Zechariah, to put this all in perspective. The people who had been so proud of their privileged status as God's people had seen it all crumble. And they looked to the God who had made a covenant with them years before and expected their time of power and privilege to be restored. But it never was, not as they expected. Instead, they were to come to know this God in a posture not of strength, but of humility, riding on a donkey. The word that's translated humble in this passage frequently refers to the impoverished, to socially vulnerable people. By using this word, Zechariah identifies this messianic king with the poor and the oppressed, the huddled masses yearning to be free. The God whom we gather around today as we worship is a God who does indeed come to free us and all people from everything that diminishes us. This God announced God's mission when Jesus said he had come to proclaim release to the captives and good news to the poor. Jesus' mission sounds a lot like the precious valuing of all human beings that are the bedrock values of this country of ours. And just as we regularly confess our own shortcomings as God's people and pray for God's forgiveness and strength to do better, it's no less threatening for us as a whole people to do the same. In humility, confess our shortcomings and pray for God's forgiveness and strength to do better. That's how we thank and honor God for God's steadfast love for us individually and as a gathered people. So give thanks for all of God's blessings in your lives, for family, for church, for community, and for country. And never lose the humility to admit the faults in them all and to seek God's guidance in making lives better for all people. Because the bottom line in Zechariah's promise is that this God does stay with us for all time.